you will have noticed relatively recent in the last few years, there will be on your iPhone, ask app not to track, ask app to track. And it basically changed the way that you could track people's browsing data to show them ads, which means you could no longer retarget effectively and you could no longer build lookalike audiences. So we went from being profitable on our first order to losing money on every order because we were spending more and more money trying to rejig an algorithm that was gobbling up our cash and not returning for us.
Cecily, welcome to the show. You are the co-founder of Harriet HR, a HR automation tool. Before that, you worked in direct-to-consumer, and then I will go into that in a bit of detail in a second, but you then transferred to, some would say the good side, some would say the dark side, and you moved across to B2B. You've raised capital, you've done it yourself from a bootstrap perspective, and today you're leading the charge, as I mentioned, in B2B. So welcome to the show. Let's start with the direct-to-consumer story. You were a art gallery director after studying art, and then you went, "Oh, I want to be an entrepreneur." How did that go?
Okay, so I studied something even more irrelevant for the commercial world than art. I studied history, and basically thought that what's a way that you can make money from history without having to become a history teacher? And that turned out to be the art world. So I worked for an auction house and then I ran a gallery. And it was quite an unusual operating model, this gallery. What we used to do is collaborate with big contemporary artists and designers, people like Anish Kapoor or Jeff Koons, and we would get them to make jewellery in very small editions, which we would then sell to art collectors. And there was precedent for this in the art world. Little known fact, Picasso, Calder also made jewellery, which we used to sell at the gallery. And at the time, first of all, I think if you're not the kind of entrepreneur who age 16 is selling all their stuff, which I wasn't that kind of entrepreneur, I think it is an incremental process. So I went from big auction house to small gallery, whereas a gallery director, the idea that you need support to function, you can't really succeed in that environment if that is how you want to operate, because all the decisions you basically have to make. You're all kind of selling. We had these big kind of operational art fairs where we'd be shipping the whole gallery over to Miami for a week kind of thing. So at that point, I took a decision in my mind of, I just don't want to be selling art anymore. I want to be buying art one day. So I was like, okay, what's the next step for me? I don't want to stay in the art world. And I'd been thinking about this for a while, but my friends often would look at the kind of stuff that we were making at the gallery and be like, this is unbelievably cool. And I really like the idea of kind of individual collectible. But at the gallery, everything was so, so expensive. So I basically thought, what if we could take this operating model where you get amazing independence to design stuff, but then you take the manufacture in-house, which means that you take some of the margin. What if you could do that and scale it? And that's basically what happened. I was chatting to an old university friend of mine called Alana, and she was still in a job at the time. I started working on it, and then she came and worked with me. We were co-founders. We went and raised money. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, which I'm still on.
Amazing. So that brand was called Motley?
Motley, yes, it was.
After yourself?
Well, I actually felt really silly calling it that because when you're first thinking of an idea, I liked the idea of like a motley crew. This covers all these different designers. Yes, it's my surname, but really it's about the word motley. I like the fact that jewellery is often considered kind of quite floral. They're called floral. They're called like, flu, free bush, whatever. They're not actually called that. But then when my co-founder and I were working on it together, we were like, we need a new name, but we never quite got there.
Never quite got there.
Never quite got there.
I think one of the interesting bits of that is you went and raised money. You kind of just said that offhand there, but raising money straight off the bat for someone, as you mentioned, hadn't gone into that world before. What was that like? Where did you even start, or did you even know where to start?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think a lot of people will say things like, it's just a friends and family round. Like, what? Friends and family are giving you like 100K to invest. So my co-founder and I had been at university together and had very different skill sets. I had gone into the art world. I had the kind of design chops. She was a really incredible consumer operator. She'd worked for places like Innocent was one of the big places she'd worked, Itsu. And so from a kind of commercial model building perspective, we were both quite aligned that we wanted to build something really big. And when you want to build something really big, we were both quite aligned that the way I used to think about it at the time is that if you want to build a really big fire, you've got to throw logs on it. You might have a good idea, but unless you can really get it going, it felt like, because you need quite a lot of startup capital for things like stock, which is now a very unfashionable thing to put investment capital towards. It felt like we needed to kind of start with a lump of cash in order to give this a proper run for its money. And how did we go about fundraising? So our first round, we had entrepreneurs within our circle. I knew who actually came in on a small ticket. A friend of mine was running a big consumer stationery business that operated on a very similar model. And he was very helpful for introducing us to investors, effectively like, I'm backing these guys, I know them, it's a very similar business model. So we basically just asked everybody. And that is how we raised that first angel round, which was about £375,000, something like that.
Cool.
And we kind of had to learn as we went, just by speaking to people. And in this country, SEIS and EIS is a very helpful startup tax relief scheme. So anybody listening who hasn't heard of those, look into them. I don't know if the rules have slightly changed now, but it effectively means that you get tax relief on money that you invest in early stage. And that is something that angel investors are very happy to. It means that they're happy to take a punt on something.
Yeah, exactly. So for anyone in the audience that's listening, it's basically SEIS and EIS. The slight difference in those, nuances in those, are the difference in the company sort of statistics, such as age of the business, revenue of the business,
exactly,
things like that. And then there is a certain level of tax relief on those. It's the kind of position where a angel could invest £10,000 in a startup, but then actually, if that business fails, they would only actually be at a net loss of maybe 60% of that or 40%
Correct.
of that, sorry, the other way around,
Correct.
which is an unbelievable opportunity, but also both for the startup and also for the angel, hopefully, when that business succeeds. So what year was this in when you started Motley?
2017, 2018.
2018. So fast forward a couple of years, you chose Instagram, which I think a lot of people wouldn't be surprised that was a obvious choice in terms of what your brand did. Jewellery, very visual, made a lot of sense for you to grow on that channel, and you did.
Yeah,
very well, substantially. You're well into the millions in revenue. or forecasted to go well into the millions in revenue, when sort of the master of your own success hit back at you pretty hard.
Yeah. So we were all through COVID. It was a kind of perfect storm of when COVID hit, lots of retailers who had bricks and mortar, but more broadly retail, when uncertainty happens, people really pull up. So what that meant for us is big players who were typically saturating these channels were not spending as much money. So advertising was much cheaper for us at that time. And consumers who had once been out and about, and we were competing for these kind of things with competing for your share of wallet. In that time, we kind of grew incredibly fast because we had everybody sitting at home, COVID lockdown, on Zoom, feeling depressed about being on Zoom and buying themselves jewellery because they had lots of money to spare if they were in work, which our average order value is 150 quid. So typically, not cheap. So most people had a job. So that combined with some really good press coverage at that time, we grew really, really fast. And then 2021, we just closed a bridge and our logic there was close a bridge. We're just a little bit too small for a really good Series A right now, and we might get penalised, and the terms will be more advantageous if we just wait growing at this pace for a little bit longer, 6-7 months. So we're going to raise a bridge now ahead of a really big Series A. And just after we closed that bridge, we noticed that something funny was going on with Instagram. Suddenly, our average order value was the same, but our acquisition cost was going up. Now, sometimes with Instagram, what we had found is that you had to slightly spend your way out of problems. So the algorithm changes, you just need more data, so you need to show it to more people. And the way that we typically made money on Instagram is we would retarget people. So once you've been on our website, you've been looking at, it's a considered purchase jewelry. We would be able to show you ads after you'd been on the website and kind of remind you of the thing that you'd been looking at. And that was one way that we would convert people. And then the other way was through effectively a lookalike audience, which says something like, if you like this and this, then you are probably going to like this. Another very effective way to scale what you're doing very quickly. Now, in about the summer of 2021, the numbers around that looked a bit dodgy. So we kept spending. Now, about 3 or 4 months later after that, it was apparent that as a channel was no longer going to work. And that was because Apple, and I wonder if this will probably resonate to most people listening, you will have noticed relatively recent in the last few years, there will be on your iPhone, ask app not to track, ask app to track. And it basically changed the way that you could track people's browsing data to show them ads, which means you could no longer retarget effectively and you could no longer build lookalike audiences effectively. So we went from being profitable on our first order to losing money on every order because we were spending more and more money trying to rejig an algorithm that was gobbling up our cash and not returning for us. So that Christmas we did okay, but we didn't absolutely smash it. And then in January, February, we'd been trying to find a replacement channel that could return as quickly as we needed it to. But more old-fashioned channels like wholesale, part of our whole kind of positioning was around we're really well priced for really amazing stuff. And the way that we did that was because we were online and we didn't have to have a wholesale model where your margin, the wholesaler takes a chunk and then you take a chunk, which means you make things quite cheaply and then you add on for the wholesaler and then you add on for you. Whereas we took out the wholesaler, which meant that it was really nicely priced. So very difficult to turn the ship around. War with Ukraine, and we took the decision to close the company down and give remaining cash from that and selling the rest of our stock back to our investors, which was quite difficult.
This episode is sponsored by Opus. Opus brings entrepreneurs together to create opportunity through power of connection. Opus is a curated community for business builders who understand that relationships are the backbone of business and success. If you are an entrepreneur, founder, business builder, laser focused on a mission, Opus could be for you too. To find out more, go to joinopus.org. Now back to the show. Very challenging. I would love to dive into that in a bit, but one positive bit of news that happened around that time was that you were pregnant and then you had your first child.
Yeah, I was thinking about whether I'd mention that or not. Yeah, on top of that, so we closed our bridge. I was so pregnant. We closed our bridge, and then I went off on maternity for 3 months, and I was very lucky to have a co-founder, because I think if you do not have a co-founder and you are a female founder, it is something that is not spoken about enough, mostly because there aren't many female founders. It is tough going to have babies and run companies at the same time. Got back, then had my son, then came back, and all of that was happening, and decided to fill the company was when he was still extremely small.
Oh, gosh.
It's quite intense.
So yeah, that sounds like you had your hands full across the board. But one of the most exciting elements of anyone's life in one hand, and one of the most challenging parts probably in your life to date to the other. So super challenging. We'll talk a bit more about family later because it's such a beautiful topic. But let's talk about that tough time. Like how obviously it didn't feel good, but that must have weighed really hard. Like you'd built something to such a high, and then feel like it's kind of been taken out of your hands and been taken away from you with something which had literally your name on the door. Like a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have bounced back like you have in such a speedy time. Like how did you deal with that kind of loss of that business and colleagues?
I think that is the word, I think it is its own kind of grief. And it is this huge sense of loss. And it was one that the thing that I'm really, really proud about with that company is that so many of our team were so invested in it. And I still get messages from the team that I worked with being like, oh my goodness, we did this so much better, or it's such a shame, like Motley forever. The culture that we built, I'm really, really proud of. But it was a real hammering. It was a real hammering. And it takes quite a lot of time to process, and I have gone both ways on it. And by both ways, I mean, at one point I thought, okay, well, we just got stuff wrong, and we didn't do X, we didn't do Y. And like radical responsibility, what were we responsible here? But I've now actually slightly come the other way, which is it was a bloody good company. Excuse my French. Maybe we have to take that out. It was a great company. And we executed it really well. And it is a tough, tough market. And this has since driven so many of my decisions of the channels are so saturated. Do not be at the mercy of a single channel. So I can now, with a bit of distance, take so many learnings from it that I'm grateful for, and also understand that the only way to learn really, I think, is the hard way. Because that's the only thing that really pushes growth, is being forced to think differently, to exist outside of your comfort zone. And I learned some really important things in that process about leadership, about management at crisis times, and how you do that and how you do that well. And I think we as a leading team did that not well. And then I think we did that quite well. So when I got back from maternity leave, when my son was 11 weeks old, we came back, looked at the numbers and realized we had a massive footfall. And this was the conversation around VC capital had really shifted over COVID. And I don't know if you remember this, but there were a lot of emails going around being like, after these crazy money times going into, you're going to have to extend runway for 5 years, profitability. It had gone from like grow at all costs to profitability. And it is hard to turn a ship.
The grow quick or die. Was it grow fast or die quickly?
Or die trying.
Or die trying, basically, was the rhetoric for years, which is where VCs were gambling with their money and pumping it in and just basically saying work, grow. And if you aren't going to achieve that, I want you to die quickly so then we can move on to the next one. And then suddenly end of COVID and it just completely switched and went, actually, which now makes so much sense, that business should be profitable.
Yeah. Oh, profitability, that old chestnut. Good margin, that old chestnut. So when we got back, we realized, okay, we need to tighten down. And now you see this in startups all the time, right? The last 2 years have been people tightening up on their teams so quickly. And we'd done that classic thing. We had hired ahead of thinking that we were going to close this big round. So got back and had to fire half our team. And we learned a lot from that. I don't think we did that perfectly, but we learned a lot from it. And then when we actually had to close the company down, how we did that, how we communicated to people, how we took them on the journey. And I remember someone saying to me at the time, this is what it's all about. You are paid to make difficult decisions. You are not paid to go to podcasts and, go to dinner and tell people that you're a founder. You are paid to make really difficult decisions, and that is your job. And I found that oddly comforting at the time. Of this is really difficult, but this is the path that I've chosen. Didn't necessarily know when I started it that that's the path I'd chosen, but now I do know, and I feel much more comfortable with that.
Amazing. So you're experiencing what you had sort of experience there with not only laying off some people in the team, closing the business down, having a newborn baby.
Yeah.
From what I know, and when we've spoken off camera, you work hard. You work damn hard. So that sort of summer when all of this is going on, the mental strain, and I think about some of the decisions I've had to make over the past sort of 5 years of my entrepreneurial sort of journey, and some of those decisions have been hard, but probably not as hard as that. And there's some sleepless nights in there and some very long days and just stuff that won't leave you alone in the back of your mind. That's what those decisions do to you. So to make decisions like that, did you experience burnout and sort of get to a point where you were just completely wiped?
Yeah, I was knackered. I was so tired after all of that, not just from having a baby, but also being so worried when being heavily pregnant and fundraising and being are we not going to get the money because they know that I'm pregnant and having a baby, they're not going to take us seriously, all that kind of stuff. And it is definitively harder to raise money, A, for a consumer company, B, for a consumer company run by 2 women. I mean, the statistics support it, but that is definitely the case. Having now raised money for a tech company with a man, I could tell you it is like night and day. So I was really...
It's a very sad reality.
Yeah. It is. It is the reality. Yeah. But I think, again, looking at that learning journey piece, what did I learn from that? I was really burnt out. And before I then decided to start another company, I was like, I'm never doing that again. Absolutely not. But I think the reason that it was so difficult is that I hadn't learned to separate the business from myself. And I think if you want to run for stamina, and typically these businesses return, it's not 3 years. Some people's do, but a lot of them, it's 10 years. It's 15 years. You've got to be able to be in it for the marathon and not the sprint. And what I've learned from that is do not tie your self-worth up with a company. And a healthy distance actually helps with decision making. And I think...
But how do you do that?
Okay.
I think this is a really interesting and key topic. I would say that 98% of founders in the early stages, which is the majority of people, just because of the statistics around sort of how long businesses last, is sort of sub 2 years, and it's a very low number.
Most people are early stage,
Most people are early stage is my point. But I think what you just said is very interesting. I actually do agree with you, but I think it's really hard, which is, I understand what you're saying about not wrapping a sort of, the business is more than just you, and the business isn't you. But especially if you're, let's say, just you and a co-founder, or just you, or maybe even a small team of sort of 5 and below, you do feel like it's you.
Yeah.
Like literally every single day. And you very much, I find myself doing this, and maybe that's because I'm obsessed with what I do and I love what I do. But when people say, "Hi James, how are you?" And I'll say, "Well, Shake's doing this well." Like, because that is my mood. That is if I'm having a good week with the work. Whilst if I ask someone who's in what I call like a normal job, and they're working with whatever function they have, and I say, "How are you?" They go, "Well, I'm fine, thank you. My partner's doing well, and I'm looking forward to my trip in a month's time." And obviously, I do the same, but it comes in a slightly different order.
Yeah. So how have I done that, and why? Okay, so I think 2 things have happened here. The first thing is when something doesn't work out for a long time, and why Motley was so stressful, always above my head, what is going to happen if it doesn't work out? What is, what does that make me? And the answer is, it didn't work out. The worst happened. It didn't. And you get up and you go again. So I think part of that is that the worst happened, and then you can walk around that, which helps to separate for the next thing. I think the other thing that I have found very helpful is to slightly view, and I didn't do this in the last company, but I do this more now, is to view my skill set and my investment more as a VC would. So what I'm giving to this idea and this company, my thesis on the market is this. I think this is the right place to be. I have more of a holistic sense of what I think success looks like and how you get there. Not, I've had this one idea and I'm going to run at it. Now I have more of a, I like the look of this market. I like the look of the problem in this market. And my investment in this is not money. That's not what I have. My investment in this is my time, my energy, my opportunity cost is going to be, that's how I'm investing in this. And I think that I find this really interesting. It's become more of a kind of intellectual exercise rather than a validation exercise.
So interesting. Well, that'd be a whole new podcast in itself. So let's dig into the first bit, which is bouncing back and moving on to the next thing, right? So after Motley, you basically said to yourself, you just said to me, you said, "I'm never doing that again." I was crazy the first time, even more crazy potentially the second time. Well, there was a second time, and it wasn't too long. So a few months later than shutting down Motley, you go again. Now, this is one of the most fascinating sort of parts of any podcast that I've done in recent time because of what happened next, which is you went from B2C to B2B. Now, I know that doesn't sound that scary, but for anyone who has run a B2C and B2B business or the other way around, it's actually pretty unusual. You normally stick in your lane. You normally because they are very different. They are different channels. They are different brands. They are different type of products, different sales cycles, the lot. So typically you get good at one, you build loads of knowledge and you go, well, I think it'd be not the smartest decision to go across the fence. But you did. So here you are, someone who's built a fashion brand for multiple years, worked in art before that, and then you now run a B2B tech business,
Sure.
which is unusual. So how did that come about? You have a co-founder, which we spoke about a little bit earlier. How did you meet him? And tell us about Harriet HR.
Yeah. Okay. So as I was licking my wounds from Motley processing with a stock business, there are lots of quite grim things. There are grim in every business, but less so with the tech business of like the physical offloading of objects. So that's like sales or like, you know, messaging all the designers being like, do you want our stands, our, you know, our Motley signs that we used to have in store, that kind of thing. And that was kind of summertime. And as I was like, I'm never doing that again. And around that time, I think it was my co-founder from Motley, Ilana, who had said, oh, I've met my now co-founder, David, for coffee, and I think he's looking for a co-founder for something that he's working on. I said, you know, I don't think she'll go for it, but why don't you speak to Cecily? And the business that he proposed to me is different. We were selling into HR, but it was a different business. We kind of pivoted into the direction that we're in now. And it was around a maternity and paternity leave product for SMEs, which allows you to effectively insure your workforce against lots and lots and lots and lots of people having babies at the same time, which is often an excuse used by leadership to say we can't be more generous because it's impossible for us to model this. And if we had lots of events at the same time, we'd be in real trouble. And it made me, the process of those conversations with David made me, after I'd had a little bit of time off, I was looking after my son at the time, made me kind of take a beat and think, okay, what do I want to do next? Something that I felt, going back to this thesis point, why move from consumer into B2B? We've spoken about this, but this question of channels is now my kind of core thesis for marketing. We were really, really pinched by the fact that we were over-reliant on one channel. We did not own our own growth channel. So we were always at the whim of an algorithm change. And we thought that we'd been so clever building this brilliant brand because 50% of our sales are organic. But Instagram was still an essential block in the conversion funnel, even for our organic customers. They were still reminded, or because they were lazy, they'd just click through from Instagram to buy. So when that no longer worked, or retargeting didn't work, we couldn't recover from it. And when I was meditating on what we had done well and what we hadn't done well, I came to the conclusion that actually we had executed really well. The main challenge for that business is that you can build something really good and it still not do absolutely crazy enormous because the channels are so saturated. So then I started to look around and be like, what does the B2B world look like? What are the core channels there? And the other push from consumer is this all happened. We were closing down when war with Ukraine broke out. We had had supply chain problems from COVID, then war with Ukraine. Consumer is just such a tough business. Doing anything that involves discretionary spend, people feel poor now. There is no certainty. And life is getting more expensive and their salaries are not going up. So even if you have a great brand, you've got to find people. And even if you find people, you've got to take money that they need to spend on themselves over something that is essential. So I just think the future is not in consumer. I don't think that's where really big businesses are going to be made at the moment. Some can be. I'm not saying it can't be done. But for me, I was like, I don't think that's the place to be again. And I think you can borrow a whole load of consumer tactics about how you work with influencers, about how you communicate your brand message, about how you drive memorability. B2B brands are often so bad at this. There are some really good ones, but most are bad. And that was why I thought, okay, I can see there's a good problem here. I think this lends itself to a brand kind of conversation. I really like the channels. And how am I going to capitalize on these hard-won learnings, so hard-won, if I don't do it again? And that's why I decided to do it again.
Amazing. So the stats that I've got noted down are 20% of the employee workforce in the UK are unengaged. And the same statistics, so 20% of HR teams spend most of their time doing administrative tasks and micro requests.
Yeah.
Now, this is something which Harriet HR deals with a lot.
Yeah.
So although it's had a couple of transitions over the past couple of years, what is Harriet doing today?
Yeah.
And who for?
Yeah. It's been a really interesting journey. So today we're an HR automation platform. And what we do is we kill repetitive manual tasks and we give your employees a great experience and help you drive efficiency. And how do we do that? We are absolutely AI native, built on AI. We pivoted into this company when the big models were released in 2022. And by that, I mean Claude, ChatGPT, open source models where you could build new products using them. We take the reactive questions, tier 1 questions. So like, where's my pay slip? All the boring stuff that you just need as an employee and you need to answer as an employer, which should not take a huge amount of time and effort and frustration, but so often does. We deal with all of that. We get you speaking to the right person when you need to speak to for an employee. And for the HR teams, we can sort all of that ticketing, knowledge management, help all of your policies, etc., be in order. And then we can start to fully automate processes. So when you think about an HRIS tool, what you'll think about is an orchestrated system. So think about onboarding someone. It'll be like, great, you need to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Harriet is agentic, which means we can pull from your HRIS tool all the stuff you need to do and then actually do it. So instead of orchestrating all these layers, you can just click a button and do it. To just go into that in a more, give you a better example. For example, contract, pull the information, goes into the HR system, can notice there's holes in the data, can then send a text message to be like, oh, hey, James, question. We've noticed you don't have this. You're starting on Monday. Can you send us that information? Takes it, puts it back into the system, and you don't have to do any of it.
So, super interesting topic at the moment, and I'm sure it still will be in a handful of months when this podcast comes out, which is just sounds like you're a tech product that is now labeling themselves as AI powered.
Yeah.
It's just a nice fancy wrapper on top of an LLM that exists anyone. So therefore, you've got no real moats to somebody else to come in and do the same thing. Now, to my understanding of Harriet, that's not the case. You actually have quite a big moat with the sort of level of data and information that you sort of input into the platform. But there is quite a few AI-powered tech businesses come out of nowhere at the moment, which if you're not AI-powered, you're not getting investment, right?
Correct. Okay, so let's talk to investment separately. Let's start with AI-powered and what that means. So I actually recently wrote a white paper on this, specifically in the HR tech area rather than more broadly. And using data from a platform called Stacked, which is a kind of aggregator of HR tech. They shared their raw data, and over 60% of HR tech tools describe themselves as AI powered.
Which by the time this podcast comes out, it'll probably be 85%.
Will be 95%.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think I think about it with this lens. You have to think about either SaaS Plus, which is we are pre 2022, we are pre the launch of AI technology. That is where we built our view of the world and our SaaS view of the world. And we pull data into that system. And then come 2022, we are building some AI on top that helps you use the information in that system with more ease, helps us deliver our view of the world with more ease. Take then post 2022, that's a company like ours, which I refer to as AI native. So the whole way of solving a problem is conceived within AI. And the key to AI is that you no longer need structured data sets. You don't need to impose your view of the world first in the questions that you ask. It can take raw data from everywhere to do what you need it to do, and it can make reasoned decisions and act on your behalf. So that's going to be a completely different product than a SaaS Plus product, which not always. They will look at, there are some ways to integrate. We can integrate with everything, pull data from anywhere and pull it together to answer a question, rather than you have to live within this system, but we're going to make it easier for you to do that.
Makes complete sense. So I want to jump back to a question a minute ago, just around who you sell to. So you're selling to people teams, HR teams at the moment, who have these administrative tasks. Rather than replying to that email, where's my, payslip, James? It's just like it's done for them. But then aren't you replacing them? In the sense of, like, Harriet is effectively saying you don't need 10 HR people now, you just need 5.
It's a really good question. And actually, honestly, I think we would sell at multiples of the pace if we were just saying you don't need anyone. But that's not the case. It's about being able to do high value work, basically. The people function, and it's been very interesting coming into this. So at Motley, we were doing a lot of that work ourselves, my co-founder and I, and then bringing in HR consultants when we needed them as we scale before you bring someone permanent in. It's been very interesting to look at this function. And in the same way that I look at consumer versus B2B in how much manual, difficult stuff there is to do, it's very much the case in the people function. There is just a lot of process, manual, and there are tools. Don't get me wrong, there couldn't be more HR tools. Your L&D system, your applicant tracking system, your HRIS system. There are so many, but they still require someone to orchestrate. People in the team still need answers, so they go directly to somebody. So what we're trying to do is take away all the manual busy stuff, so people teams can actually deliver strategic value, which is really why they're there.
Awesome. And then growth so far, I guess it's kind of like 2 halves have been played thus far. You kind of had the pre-AI transition and then since that. So sort of how's it going so far? And I guess what I'd love to know is what's the next 5 years look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we started off in a much more question answering admin position. Let's say in the first year of the business of let's say chatbot. But what we've built is an increasingly powerful and complex product. So we started off selling to slightly smaller companies because our hypothesis was you're going to augment your HR person. How amazing. If you've only got 2 in a team, this is going to be your 3rd hire. But what we realized pretty quickly is that actually question answering is a problem in a smaller company. But once you get into bigger companies, it is so much more complex and complicated. You've got to do tickets with the IT team. You've got really complicated knowledge management. How do you decide who gets what information when? And actually the idea of servicing these questions becomes more and more complicated. And that is where we've blossomed and flourished, and we've gone up in the company. So we are typically kind of 250 to 2,000 people is where we add the most value. And we started with a more HR focus, but now I would say that's our point of differentiation: security, permissioning, HR is a high risk place to deploy AI because
Can't get it wrong.
you can't get it wrong. Yeah, this is people's lives and people's careers. We know, because we've built specifically for this space where there's something sensitive, our permissioning is pretty bulletproof. So you're not going to be in a situation where your intern has just pulled your CEO's payslip.
Oh, gosh.
You know, imagine, it's high stakes. But where we've gone from there is taking this and building much more complicated workflows across the business. So operational processes and with IT built in as well.
Unbelievable.
It's cool. And I think we'll move to get more and more.
More
basically.
and more. Amazing. How big is the team at the moment?
So we're 6 people and then we have freelancers all around us.
Awesome. And we also were talking a little bit off camera about size of team. Now,
Yeah.
I think both of us have probably transitioned our view over the past few years that
Totally.
you don't need a big team. So do you have like, because we've got a bit of a golden number at Shake, which I won't release here, but
Release the number.
maybe down the line. Do you have like a golden number of where you sort of see the perfect blend? Have you sort of fleshed that out? Have you mind mapped that?
I don't think it's that many more people, actually. I think having the reason why we don't need loads of people is because we really eat our own dog food, is because we are to our absolute core an AI enabled company. And when I think about running Motley, we needed a lot of boots on the ground. Our marketing, our content was a huge cost to the business. Absolutely necessary, but it was a huge amount of our spend. And it's just not necessary in the same way for this business across all verticals. From a development perspective, we are so much quicker. We don't need hundreds and hundreds of developers in order to deliver quite a complicated product. So what's the golden number of people? The answer is
10?
Yeah, probably, actually. Maybe 12.
Thing is as well, you can, with the amount of AI agents that can be built around, outside of your own product, right? And also the fact you can always have freelancers and contractors in there. As you say. Are you a hybrid business?
We are hybrid. We are a couple of days in the office. We're in Tech Space, Goswell Road.
Nice. Is that something you advocate for? Now you've sort of tested the water? Because at Molly, you were all in person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've kind of done both.
And then completely remote
Oh,
because of COVID.
Yeah.
I think that hybrid is probably the dream of both. I think asking people to come into an office every day is kind of unreasonable, honestly. Particularly now that I have a young family, 2 hours on the tube is just a waste of my time. But being in person, I maintain, is really important for communication, particularly in a young business where those systems and processes aren't perfect yet. So in bigger companies, there are loads of structures around to make sure that communication happens at the right moment, but when you're building, you are also building systems and processes as you go. And I think typically you work out that you need a system and process when something goes wrong. And it's much easier to troubleshoot that with people around you. I think it is really important. And I also think it's important for cohesion, for team cohesion, and for the kind of soft stuff, which means that people feel like they can air problems or ask for something or know someone well enough to raise an issue.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have set days?
Yeah, we do. Wednesday
nice.
and Friday.
Does it work?
It does work.
Not going to change it up? Not going to mix it up and do a Monday, Tuesday?
Well, I think Friday's pretty rogue, isn't it? But we kind of did that on like what the offices had available, because when you're only doing 2 days, you kind of pair up, you're kind of matched with other companies and you kind of get the days that are left over.
Works nicely. Awesome. It's an interesting topic around hybrid and not. I think many are still trying to work it out. But you mentioned your young family. So we mentioned your son earlier. You've added another one to the clan, to the crew.
I have.
Last year or the end of last year.
Yes, exactly.
Must have been a Christmas baby.
Nearly, yeah, October.
Okay, so bit out of my days.
Yeah.
But that's okay. So I think It's one of those questions I ask on this show, if I'm being perfectly honest, with regards to work-life balance, because I kind of a bit bored of saying work-life balance. Like those words or that phrase is getting a bit old. However, most people, not most people, but a lot of people are looking at families. You know, they might have one, might have a young or an old family, might have no sort of children at the moment, and they're looking to have some in the near future. You know, entrepreneurial ages kind of range, but let's say those that are of an age of having a young family or are looking at it, it's quite an important question. Like, how do you balance that? Like, you are going again, you've built again, but you've now got 2 children to look after. Obviously, you've got a great husband who can help you with that, but yeah, it's really damn challenging.
It's really hard, and we would not be able to do it. I took 3 months, 11 weeks for the first baby and 4 months for the second one.
Next one will be 5.
Yeah. God. And in a perfect world, I would definitely have taken a much, much longer maternity leave. But these are the things that you balance. And the reason that I'm able to do that and able to do that without feeling a huge weight of guilt. Some people don't, but I think if you have to put your kid when they're absolutely the tiny, tiny babies into nursery, they get sick and stuff like that. We can do that because my husband has 6 months paid paternity leave. It is game changing. It makes a huge difference and has enabled us to take the decisions that we make, which is why I am a huge advocate for paternity leave in businesses, because it makes the difference on 2 levels. And I'm going to bore you with this, but it's important. The first level is 2 weeks paternity leave and 52 weeks maternity leave is the current legal allowance. What does that say about who we think should be doing what in our society? That's the first thing. The second thing is so much research has shown that unless both parents, the parent who takes sole charge remains the parent who is the CEO of parenting decisions for the rest of the child's life. So unless you have dads taking decisions early doors, you don't redress that balance. So it impacts further on down the career ladder, which is then when you have big pay gaps, gender inequality, you don't have women in the boardroom. It's a major problem.
Yeah.
This is my rant. I've done it.
I love it. And it's a good rant and worthwhile having. It's incredible, isn't it? Like females, women do one of the most magical, amazing things in life. They carry a human being and put them into this world. And then on top of that, they may literally be left no choice but to take full year's worth of maternity for the financial side of that business of life.
Totally.
You know, that's crazy.
Totally.
And it is ridiculous. And you know, I also say to those out there that maybe have 2 entrepreneurial sort of people in that relationship, good luck to you, because that's, you might have a little bit more freedom in terms of you can decide your own time, but that makes the financial angle especially extremely tricky.
What I would say is that for the most part, being an entrepreneur, I think, is an enormous privilege. You get to decide your own destiny. You get to make bets on what you think is going to happen and run at them. You get to hire people who you think are great, and you get to run at something that you believe in. That is a huge privilege. The downside of that, and God does not give with both hands, is that if you have a young family, it comes part and parcel. That is the other side. That's the dark side of the mountain, is that there's not an extended maternity leave. There's not lots of money sloshing around. There might be, and I would encourage anybody who is an entrepreneur to think as they scale their business about how they structure themselves out of it, because that's good hygiene more than anything else. But for so many people, particularly if they're running their own gig, that's not the option that they have. Have babies anyway. They're totally great. But that bit of it is tricky. And it's also tricky if your contemporaries, if you're a woman particularly, who have long leaves and such like. And I'm like, wow, God, I mean, just had, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, 11 months. And often they've been having a difficult time. But you have to be like, it is a privilege to be an entrepreneur, and I chose this path, and it's great. But this is one of the challenging bits of it.
Yeah, 100%. And one that men don't face most of the time.
But increasingly, the key, one of the key changes for our generation, I say our, hoping that I'm not a decade older than you.
I'm sure you're not.
Is that one of the biggest changes has actually been in fatherhood and how men want to father now. And it's one of the largest reasons for quiet quitting amongst men, like middle managers, men, which is like no flexibility. They can't look after their kids. And they just quietly, they won't tell you in an interview that that's why I'm leaving, but they want to be part of their kids' lives. They want to get home for bedtime. And they just don't want to do the kind of jobs that have no flexibility.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, myself included with my peer group of men that I know, exactly that. They want to be very present and raise hopefully a very good human being and be a part of their lives. Well, as you said, potentially the generation or two before us, it was a bit more male put bread on table, which is an archaic view now. Unless you have that discussion, I guess, right? If you're, we talk about the business of business, which is what we both have co-founders, but you also have that business at home. And I personally do believe that it is a business in its own way, the home life. You have to have those conversations, often some really hard ones. But if you have those discussions early on, then of course you can align in that way.
I think the reality is, in the UK particularly, the offer for young families is not very appealing. Childcare is ludicrously expensive, particularly in early years. That requires either you drop out from working or you do a big job that pays you enough money to pay for your house and pay for your childcare. And those big jobs are not jobs where you can just nip home. Sometimes they are. And I think that is a reality of definitely London life, not all through the UK, but that lack of childcare support, I know, is felt by so many people.
So many people. I reckon, again, maybe it's because London does become a bit of a bubble. We're both here, we both live here. But I would definitely say the majority of the peer group that I'm aware of that have young families or are looking to have young families are probably in their mid-30s.
Definitely.
Which I know the age that my parents had myself and definitely their parents had them was 5 to 10 years, if not longer, before them. It's very unusual to, and obviously it's again a decision they've made. There's no wrong or right way to do it, but the 25-year-olds sort of and younger parents is just so unusual these days.
And the average age for first child is going up.
I don't know this. Do you know the statistics?
I think when I was looking at it for this first business, it was 33. And I think there is a London layer on top of that where it's older.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
So linking back to you and your journey thus far, you've got so much more to do, which I love. You super ambitious. I love what you're trying to do with Harriet. And I think, as you said, the way you've stepped back, I think only one can do really once you've had a loss of business down the line, unlocks that new level for you, which is amazing. But what question I always ask towards the end or at the end of this podcast is journey so far, or maybe not even journey so far, but for entrepreneurs, founders in general, is it more important to have luck or talent?
You've got to have both. And actually, I would say increasingly, I think luck is half the battle. You need to be able to execute, and that's talent, but you must have a decent tailwind. And if you're in the right place at the right time, you can get the volume in that you need the talent to stitch into gold. But I think it's really hard to put that talent to work if you don't have enough of the strands coming in because of where the market is. So my biggest learning on my journey, I think, is the bets that you make on the market are half the battle.
Cecily, where can people find you?
On LinkedIn. Or if you wanted to speak to me, you could maybe book a call on hrharriet.com.
Amazing. They can get a demo and a conversation with you.
And a conversation with me, maybe with one of my team and me. Maybe put in the box, can I speak to Cecily? Send me a message on LinkedIn.
Cecily, you have been my everyday founder. Thank you so much.
Thank you.